the specifics of where grants are made are going to be determined by the board themselves, right? And our buyers. What has resonance within broader Brooklyn? Where are the biggest needs? And as we've all experienced last year, those needs are very different today than they might have been a year ago when we established the fund pre-COVID, right? We might have been talking about, food shortage or education for children or arts programs, when now we might be talking about health and safety and well-being or education around vaccination or other aspects. And the specifics of that are completely separate and detached from us as sponsors. We can't participate in the future of that, but we can establish a culture within the building of caring. And we found it to be quite provocative and quite resonant, especially today.
Awesome. And what is your vision for a Better Brooklyn Fund? Do you want to do this in all of your projects? Do you want other developers to do it? Do you want it to expand beyond just New York?
Yeah, I mean, what we tried to create originally was this concept of a flip tax in our buildings, which we've done before. And the sheer volume of real estate transactions that happen in a year in a city like New York are extraordinary. And so this particular fund is a test case, right? How is it going to work? But our goal is to essentially create a culture through this where real estate can be leveraged into creating public benefit. 1% of the sheer volume of transactions that happen in New York City a year would create billions of dollars, right, of opportunity. This is the type of responsibility that I feel that we have as an industry. We have to lead. We have to try. We have to work on alternative structures and ways in which we can engage with the community, because I know my architecture peer set struggles with how to convince their clients on how to do more. And our development peer set, for the most part, and it's not fair for me to generalize so much, but for the most part hasn't done a great job at showing that they care. They're often independently philanthropic, but not corporately philanthropic, or they don't often focus on creating a culture of caring within the communities in which they work.
Got it. Okay. I want to backtrack a little bit to 100 Flatbush and just get a better understanding of how the project came about, and were you always focused on this incredibly ambitious community impact and mix of uses and having the public school in the project? Was that your goal from day one? Can you just walk us through kind of how it came about?
Yeah, it's a very complicated transaction, and it's hard to unpack, but it's about 5 years worth of acquisitions. The initial acquisition was a series of ground leases with an independent family. That ground lease, or those ground leases, contemplated the idea of assemblage because there were some pieces missing right in between some of the components that we acquired in the first instance. We made those additional acquisitions, and when we got to the last one, the city of New York owned some historic structures that dated back between 1860 and 1890 that housed the Khalil Gibran Academy, which was this dual language Arabic speaking high school. And we approached the city about acquiring the air rights as a way to create revenue for the city for additional education. And they said, well, this is really fantastic, but why don't we introduce you to the Education Construction Fund? We really need new schools. And the Education Construction Fund essentially leverages existing city-owned assets in neighborhoods where there's demonstrable seat need and additional density can be afforded. And we responded to an RFEI with the idea that not only would we deliver them one school, but we would deliver them 2 schools. And in exchange for delivering them 2 schools, they would change the density on our site from an FAR of 6.5 to 18. Ultimately, we were approved through what's called the Uniform Land Use Review Process, or ULURP, with an FAR of 15.75. And our aspirations from a public process, and I can tell you it was several years of public process. My partners and I did over 140 public meetings ourselves, right? We don't rely on council or other people to make these presentations. We ourselves stand there. And as the architect and developer, and since the neighborhood was effectively our community, we took their feedback. made massive modifications, preserved structures, modified underlying zoning regulations, eliminated things like parking, proposed additional school seats, proposed cultural institution, right? None of those were requirements other than the schools, but the idea that we could continue to push hard and create something like affordable housing or hundreds of units of affordable housing all in one fell swoop became very empowering, right? There didn't seem to be a natural limit on our capacity to borrow and scale, provided that we could get the community to engage and participate. And in the end, we did negotiate with design, right? We were doing hundreds of iterations and creating opportunities, and we solved these problems and created the public benefit through design solutions, literally.
Awesome. And do you feel that after giving the two public schools to the public, having this very open discourse with the community, that it was much easier to work with government agencies in getting the project approved and moving along?
Yeah, I mean, there's certainly a degree of political pressure and political partnership. Public-private partnerships, I think, are the future for our company in particular. I think, being architects and developers, I think we thrive on complexity, right? The market advantage is that it's our instinct and desire to solve problems in order to create opportunity, where other developers need to seek support in order to achieve, a desirable outcome. And I think the harder a site is, the more complicated it is, the more desirable it is for us. We certainly have our cadre of lobbyists and other resources, PR teams, crisis PR teams, et cetera, which are designed to help support the effort to create access when we need to communicate with the government or to think through how best to message about our work. It takes a village. I mean, it was a multi-year, multi-million-dollar effort, which is an extraordinary amount of risk to take on something that is based on a future that does not yet exist, right? But that's one of the responsibilities, and we felt empowered during the process in order to pursue that, and working hand in hand with the city and having an open dialogue about what the potential was really rewarding.
Awesome. It's great to hear how you both are tackling this problem in different ways, multiple ways in each project. I want to move on to our next section, which is about sustainability. So, Jared, speaking of 100 Flatbush and 489 State, this project is quoted as being the most sustainable block in downtown Brooklyn. It includes the city's first all-electric residential tower and first passive house public school. Can you tell us more about how and why sustainability is important to you, and what is your definition of sustainability?
Yeah, this is, to Brett's earlier point, the human part of life here. I'm a father, and I have two teenage, daughters, and I became vegan over the last year or year and a half now with my older daughter, and they see the world in a very different place and through a different lens. And I have a responsibility to come home every day and show how I'm participating in and interested in making an impact that will benefit their generation. So the sustainable aspirations of the project started at home, and then we leveraged the public process to essentially force New York City's hand into sustainability aspirations that were beyond that which an agency like the School Construction Authority is accustomed to doing, right? They're the city's largest contractor by a mile, and their annual budget for construction is in the stratosphere, which means that they have an operations and maintenance team which is very accustomed to managing and running buildings in a particular way. And we decided that if we were going to build civic buildings, that they would have to be on the edge of what was possible with the city of New York, because the city of New York itself has its own goals that will be very difficult to achieve unless they start to tackle these issues. And we said, look, if we are developing and designing the schools on your behalf, we need to push the boundaries of what those could possibly be. And therefore, the first passive house schools became a non-negotiable aspect of our deal with the city of New York, which was partially this change for density. When it came to the tower at 100 Flatbush being the first electric tower, first all-electric skyscraper, the governor and National Grid were in a squabble over whether or not they were going to expand the pipeline, and we just decided that we would take this idea of trying to deliver more of a fossil-free future and pursue a infinitely more robust program around carbon neutrality by making a building that in first instance is more sustainable than a building that contains natural gas. But in the second instance, as the grid and the New York State and New York City grid gets cleaner over time, that the building becomes infinitely more sustainable. And the local law and the law in New York City is changing fairly radically, where they're going to start imposing a carbon tax on buildings that don't comply with their sustainability goals. And we'll have one of the only buildings, and so this becomes the business case, that will actually have carbon offset credits to sell to the market. So not only is this a shift toward where do we think, or what do we think our renters and our future occupants will care about? Like, where will they choose to spend their money when renting an apartment? I think my daughter would choose to rent in our building, right? And I think her peers would choose to rent in our building, and they vote with their money, right? And they choose which companies to invest in and where to live. But we also think there's a hardline current business case for carbon offset future taxes, and it's the responsibility. So the goal with our company is to align all of those complex pieces into making something that has a social responsibility aspect to it, but which also has a business case that reflects positively on the city, in the future. And so sustainability isn't really so much a thing, it's a culture in our company, and we're trying to create a new form of sustainability, which is this economic sustainability sensibility, which is we should not be relying on subsidy or subsidy alone in order to create a greener future. We have to create a program or developments that speak to or that enable us or afford us the ability to have aspirational goals without the need for additional subsidy.
Awesome. So does this mean that you think the future of New York real estate, high rises, office, condos is all electric?
Yeah, between my business partner and I, just in the next 2 or 3 months, we're now on 4 or 5 panels where the publicly traded REITs and other companies are already, and big construction companies are all exploring these new technologies, which, by the way, couldn't be dumber. It couldn't be easier to make an all-electric skyscraper, right? It's electric hot water production and induction cooking are the 2 primary facets. When you connect those with a high-performance building envelope, you end up with an all-electric future, and a much brighter one at that.
Got it. Great. I love it. Brett, you have a sustainable concept brand that is in kind of the initial stages at the moment called Greenhouse. Can you just tell us a little bit about Greenhouse and your vision for building sustainable communities?
Yeah, I think it's really interesting to hear Jared describe sustainability, and I think in many ways we're thinking about it the same way. For us, it's not just about the physical building, the structure, the materials, which are clearly important, and something that we have focused on. We built the first ever LEED certified mixed-use building in Ohio. And, we continue to focus on how we can actually build products that are truly sustainable, using materials that are truly sustainable. And it's challenging because our economics don't always allow for that to be as widely adapted as we would like. I agree with Jared. You want to do things that you can put your head on your pillow at the end of the day. You can look your kids in the eye. But the unfortunate thing is that in this part of the country, people are only willing to pay so much for it. So you've got to really carry this as a passion, as a kind of obligation, ethically, morally, which we do. But we also try to do this from a little bit more of a holistic perspective. So for us, it's not just about the materials, it's about the experience. and how we can build human beings that are sustainable. And so that's kind of the focus of Greenhouse. We say Greenhouse, it's not about sustainability, it's about nature, it's about well-being, and it's about transformation. And so we have developed a system to build environments that are in an urban setting that feel very much connected to nature. It's heavy, lush landscaping, it's in the design, and it's in the interior and exterior design. It's in the amenities. The amenities are more reflective of a Zen, Bali spa, but at a very affordable price point. Rental product. This is not expensive condos. These are kind of market rate apartments, but you can have the experience of being at a luxury spa with all the latest and greatest biohacking. There's also a transformation program that allows people to together as a collective, as a community, to really hold each other accountable, to learn and grow together on a monthly basis by just tackling some simple, tiny habits that over time I think really are transformative. Things like the meditation center. We also have partnered with a group called Act Neutral. And so some of what we do is to try to collaborate instead of take this all on ourselves. There's other people, in this case Act Neutral, which is really focused on reducing greenhouse gas emissions. And it allows our residents to tap into a program that's well established and allows them to do some of the heavy lifting on our communal behalf. So, we're really trying to focus on this issue, like I said, from a holistic perspective. And that's really, Greenhouse's mission is how do we really incorporate sustainability, but not just from a building standpoint, from a human standpoint.
Great. So as a follow-up to that, do you think that sustainability, whether you think about it only in terms of environmental sustainability or holistic sustainability, is intertwined with community impact? Or do you think, or I'll play devil's advocate with you, is this really only a benefit for the people that live in your communities or your buildings?
Well, I think that, certainly if you are engaged in the experience of living and working in our communities, you're going to be more likely to be impacted. Now, we do have a lot of engagement with the surrounding community. So like I said, we have BESA, which is the nonprofit portal, which allows people to get out into the broader community. And so by living in our community, if you're engaged in, first of all, becoming a more sustainable, healthy human being, we believe that's going to automatically have an impact where you work, who you surround yourself with, how you engage in the broader community, whether it be through philanthropic activity or just your general sense of being. I do believe that by focusing on the people that are in our immediate community, we will make an impact on the surrounding community. When I say let's make our attempt at changing the world, that's kind of how I believe really that we can have an impact on the world by having enough people going through our communities over and over again over the years that come out healthier and happier and able to be of service to others. I think over time that can really make a difference.
Great. I totally agree with you. Jared, I will ask you the same question about whether you think sustainability and community impact are intertwined. Can you make community impact without sustainability? And how important is sustainability in kind of one of the pillars of the many ways you produce impact?
You are right over there, by the way, with the sirens.
Sorry, yeah, sirens in my neighborhood.
No problem. Look, sustainability is critical to the overall development, but I do think this is, I think the goal for us, I mentioned it early on, is to democratize space in such a way that this is not about exclusivity, it's about inclusivity, right? And the design has to be welcome, and the messaging and the culture has to be welcome. or welcoming in such a way that there should be no boundary, there should be no border, right? And there's a lot of early critical decisions that we have to make as architects in order to stimulate those types of interactions, like where we put the basketball courts for the school on the ground floor so that the community could use them for their own basketball games because there's not enough green space around, or creating, a cultural institution on the prime corner versus taking that for retail for ourselves, or other gestures that are not so subtle, right? And being deliberate in those choices that we make. From a sustainability perspective, I think the relationship to the community is clear. We need to set an example for our peers such that it becomes contagious to a degree, right? These big buildings, I think, especially in urban settings, are seen as great producers of waste and other byproducts that are not healthy, and it articulates them very clearly on a Wednesday at 8 p.m. when trash is brought out to the street, right? But if we think through, different programs, even on how to manage waste from the buildings or the byproducts of waste, recycling and all of the other things that we might do, and composting and zero waste, creating zero waste challenges, part of the culture or otherwise within our buildings, I think that connection to the community can be stronger. Because I think a lot of the opposition that we, received early on is a skepticism about the sheer volume of byproduct and waste that comes out of, density and extreme density. And an FAR of 15.75 in Brooklyn is, in the stratosphere relative to a typical FAR of 1.5 or 2 that is prevalent throughout the borough.
Got it. Great. So I want to move on to our last section, which will kind of just be a high level wrap up here. If you have not asked a question that you want to ask, please do so in the chat now. Once we finish up this last session, we'll head to Q&A. And I know there's a lot of really good questions out there already. So there's an enormous discussion happening right now about affordable housing, and rightly so. But outside of affordable housing, you guys have talked about a ton of different ways that you are creating an impact. Which way or which avenue do you think developers should be focusing on to make the most impactful or effective impact?
Yeah, I'm happy to jump in. From an affordability standpoint, I don't profess to be an expert in affordability. We predominantly are a market rate developer. So I want to be transparent about that, but this is an issue that we care about. We think it's important. We think it's something that is necessary to build a conscious community. And so what we have done is we've partnered with others that are experts in this. Our belief is really not in trying to figure out how to solve every problem, but who it is that might be best positioned to solve the problem. So in our case, we use the assets that we have. In the second phase of Gravity, we've partnered with an affordable housing developer, Homeport, which is a Columbus-based organization, to build truly affordable housing, and we will help them develop it. We will give them parking. We let them utilize our amenities so that they're integrated into the market rate development. They're not separate from, they're not made to feel less than. They get full access to our community. But those that actually know the intricacies of that segment of the industry are well better positioned than we are to solve it. That said, there are certain parts of the city that mandate workforce housing, or they give you the option to buy that out. And we never take the buyout. In every case, we always have the workforce housing, even if economically it would make more sense to pay the bank and get the market rate. We believe in having the diversity of product as a critical piece of what it means to holistically, consciously develop real estate. The other thing which I think is really interesting, which we are building in our second phase, is co-living. And in co-living in Columbus, Ohio, that is a a non-incentivized way. There's no government incentives. There's no abatements. There's nothing there that is required for us to try to deliver a product that is more affordable. So you get a bedroom and a common community space, and you get, a common kitchen, but it's all first class, class A, and you get the full experience of brand new amenities, everything that you would get if you were in a market rate, but you pay a much lower per dollar rent. And although that's not going to get us all the way down on the affordability spectrum, it does make a dent in it, and it doesn't require any outside funding to do that. So, we're trying to be creative, and I think that there are ways to innovate around this subject affordability, that it does not have to be the traditional affordable government funded programs, that there are ways that for-profit products can deliver and address affordability.
Great. Jared, I know you have addressed affordable housing in your first project and many others, so I'll let you answer on that front as well.
Look, I think Brett's right that the consistency and the human side of how we address affordability is first and foremost a priority, right? Making sure that, affordable or people who are living in affordable homes have access to the same exact features, amenities, spaces, without any discrimination, right? That's issue number one. From an urban planning perspective, I think our thesis on Flatbush is very important, which is we should be building affordable housing right here in the center. We should be, attempting to address the changes in the community, because gentrification and change are perceived as bad, mostly because the perception is that people who grew up in these neighborhoods are being pushed out. So the more that we can keep people living within their communities and actually, to a degree, lowering the mean income in the neighborhood, in these gentrifying neighborhoods, the better. Because a typical market rate renter is earning 60 to 65 times their rent in income in downtown Brooklyn, right? Which is very different than a typical rent-burdened individual who desperately needs affordability, where more than 30% of their income is being used to support housing. And so where we choose to build housing and where we prioritize that within our cities is critical. In New York in particular, there's only so many concentric rings that you can build such that affordability continues to happen on the periphery. But that burdens that cohort of people in an even more severe way, because now they're commuting hours a day in order to get to jobs, because that is their only choice. And so we think where you build affordability is critical, which is why we're trying to leverage that density that we were afforded into affordability. And at the same time, again, to use the word, democratizing our spaces such that you should not know who has money at all when you come into the lobby. And the lobby should not be decked out in such a way that it is about luxury. It should be spaces for people. And in fact, our marketing and the communication that we will do around 100 Flatbush, we are strictly prohibited from using any modifiers when discussing the project. We are making space for people. It's not the best, it's not the most, it's not any of those other things. And I think when we get there, we are trying to build community through some of the most basic human needs, like the need for housing.
Fantastic. It's great to hear from developers who care a lot and are doing this in their community. So I really appreciate you guys being here. We have about 5 minutes left. I have one more question of my own, and then I want to make sure we get to some Q&A from the audience. So on community impact, has community impact always been at the forefront of each of your firms? And if not, what does that progression look like? Do you feel like as you've gotten more successful, you've had more leeway and been able to incorporate more into your projects? Or were you tunnel vision from day one on wanting to make sure that you were giving back to the community? Jared, I'll let you go first.
Yeah, I mean, I started development as a way to control what I call the 3 Ps, right? The principles, the program, and the priorities of our work. And initially it was about capturing value for the work of the architect, right? The, the way that the structure works in the architecture industry is we get paid the least, we take on almost the most risk, and we're afforded the least agency over our work. And what I realized quite quickly is that the agency that I was afforded by becoming the developer was infinite to a degree. All of the skepticism around somebody suggesting that a lender will not allow this or an equity partner would not allow that is, excuse my French, BS. We've never had a negotiation around design or program or value set with any one of our partners in the last 16 years of doing business as Alloy Development. We use our own capital to initiate projects, and we establish the goals for those projects, and we invite people to participate in those in that value set and in those investments in order to ensure that we share a value set with those capital partners. But I have never once had to negotiate the value set around what it is that we are doing. And so I would say that while my practice did not initially start with a laser focus on the social benefits that my projects could afford or our projects could afford, I will say that I won't do it any other way. And call it maturity, call it experience, or any of those other things, but we definitely feel like we have a responsibility here at Alloy to make Brooklyn a more beautiful, more sustainable, and more equitable place. And we won't exist without the alternative value sets that our work affords.
Wonderful. Brett, I will let you answer the same question.
Yeah, I'll try to be brief so we can get to questions, but this is a great question. I spent 15 years in banking and working for a production housing developer, and I left to start my business for this reason, because I simply couldn't go to work every day without feeling like purpose was really a part of how I spent my time. For me personally, I don't want to have a job. I don't want to feel like I'm working. Not that this is easy, but I love what I do because it is filled with purpose. And so that's always really been at the core of everything that we've done. And purpose shows up in all kinds of ways that are connected to my passions, to our team's passions, and to the community's passion. And I've given you, a whole bunch of examples of how we do that. But, I agree with Jared. Without the purpose, there really isn't anything of substance. This is the thing that makes us unique. This is our market share. But it's not for those reasons. This is not to be trendy. This is not because we think it's going to impact the bottom line. And it does. I think, that's okay. I think that we are successful largely because of purpose, but it's not the reason we do it. We do it because we love it. We think it's why we're here. And, it's a non-negotiable for us. And truthfully, it's what makes it fun to see the impact that it has when you are doing things this way. And it does. It continues to open doors. It continues to lead us to people with shared beliefs that allow us to collaborate. It allows us to get new deal flow. I mean, it allows us to do a lot, but it is fueled with authenticity and love for what we do and the impact that it has.
Awesome. I think there's a lot of young people in the audience who feel similarly and want to make sure that they're making an impact. So it's great to hear from you both who are doing it in real life. So I hope everyone's inspired. I certainly am. Our first question from the audience, and this is from Vardon. What is the value of trust in the developer community dynamic? And how can developers better establish trust with communities to maximize socioeconomic impact?
Yeah, I'll go quickly. The D word, being a developer, is impossible, right? We don't have a peer set that has done a good job in enabling us to start on the right foot. And as I mentioned before, the goal is to be transparent and present and reliable as partners, but it's going to take a significant amount of endurance in order to achieve it. And I do think it's a firm by firm thing, but I think as an industry, the industry needs to do a better job at not focusing on economics, but focusing on the very things that we're discussing here in order to achieve that.
Yeah, I'll just kind of quickly add to that. I think trust is earned, and so it's not about, anything you say, it's what you do. And so for us, we've been very diligent about getting community input on everything from architecture to anything else that matters to that community in particular, and then actually taking it in and acting on it. And then there's also just the partnerships and the collaborations with the people that are in the community, actually showing up physically and being a part of their mission, seeing how it connects to our mission, and really developing sincere, genuine relationships and collaborations that actually build trust over time. I mean, people in our communities, they see that what we say we do, they know us, they know who we are and what we care about, and they see us continually acting in that way. And then over time, they trust us. And, that's, all we can do is just, show up and, put our actions, where our words are, and hope people, buy into that and trust us over time.
Great. Next question is from Dylan, and it's, as an aspiring architect and developer, I'm curious if the hyper-sustainable model works only in the larger scale, like Jared's project, or is it feasible on small scale projects as well?
I'll just take a quick stab at that. I mean, I think that, you have to do the best that you can where you are all the time with what you have. And so I'm a huge believer in iterate, don't jump without a parachute. You have to kind of keep pushing the envelope, but you got to stick around to make the next deal. So, hyper sustainable, that might not work for somebody that's small and taking risk, and maybe it is the very thing that actually makes you successful, and that's up to you to decide. But I think there can be a little bit of kind of shaming around not getting all the way there, which I'm not supportive. If you are making your best effort to really try to make sustainability something that's tangible and that matters, and you keep trying to do that more and more each time, I think that's okay by me.
Jared, commentary?
Yeah, I mean, I think, look, this is the moment where it requires scrappiness, and you have to choose where you want to invest your energy and time. And, we built a 5 townhouse project in our neighborhood here in Dumbo, which was small, 12,000 square feet of total space or 15,000 square feet. But we ended up becoming the contractor in order to build the first passive house townhouses in Brooklyn, because we knew the construction market couldn't really handle it. So all of these things are opportunities, and they're all different types of investments, but you can certainly choose to be scrappy. I agree with Brett. We don't particularly care about the certifications or the nomenclature or any of those other things. It's about, how the work communicates and what you're leaving us with. And, as long as it happened with care and consideration, then that's more important or more valuable than most work that's being built today.
Fantastic. Well, we are at time. I want to thank you both so much for being here. I'm incredibly grateful for both of you for sharing your story, and more importantly, your values and how you think about development and how you think about being responsible developers. So thank you very much. This has been an awesome discussion, and I will hand it back over to Max.